Hi, everyone. My name is Connie Drake O'Brien. I am president of the New Jersey Association for Gifted Children. I'm very excited about tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar came about because around September, I started receiving emails and contacts from parents in the state of New Jersey who were reaching out to me because they had children who were either identified in the district as gifted and talented, or the parents were hearing from their teachers their children were gifted and talented, or family members were learning that the children that were living in their homes were gifted and talented. And as I started to talk more and more to these families, I started to realize there was a real need for us at the New Jersey Association for Gifted and Children to start picking up the conversation. What is it that we are doing at NJAGC for the families? How are we serving our families, and what exactly do the families need? And I can't do that without having the families be face to face with me. And so a few months ago, a group of families joined together with me, and we started having our own little breakfast club, only it was a dinner club on Tuesday nights. And we started meeting for a short time, an hour, and discussing what was going on in our districts, what was going on with our children, and how could we best serve not only their own children, but all the children in their districts that were gifted and talented and needed the services they deserved according to the state of New Jersey and the law that we have here in New Jersey. And one of the things we found that we really, really wanted was to be able to provide information to other families. And so out of that came tonight's webinar. So tonight we are very happy from NJAGC to bring you Michael Kalber and to bring you Juan and Myra Callis and to bring you Karen Howick. They will be speaking to you tonight about the law. Michael is an expert in the law for gifted and talented here in the state of New Jersey, and Karen and Juan and Myra are parents and family members of gifted and talented children, and they will share their experiences with you. So thank you. And remember, when this is over, NJAGC is there for you to continue this conversation. Elaine?
Thank you, Connie. Let's get started with Mike. Mike, do you want to do a self-introduction and get right to it?
Sure, I think that works well. I'm Mike Kelber. Along with being an NJAGC trustee, which is an important role, I'm the Legal One coordinator for online course development at NJPSA. That's principals and supervisors. Formerly with the New Jersey School Boards Association in the legal department for almost 30 years. The last 10 or so as director of legal, labor relations, and policy. And I've been involved in gifted education since our kids, Kelly and Brian, got involved in gifted education in the Woodbridge district many years ago. And Kelly always insists on me telling people that she was gifted in academics, theater arts, and music, Brian in music. And we were gifted PTA members and all that goes with that. So it started there. And when I went to law school and got involved in stuff, my friend Ron Hyman, who was then working with Rutgers and the School Development Council, he asked me to do some programming on gifted ed. This is like in maybe the late 90s. And it sprung from there. Roberta Braverman brought me in to do a program and been there since. So what I hope to do tonight is give you some information, base information on the law in New Jersey on gifted education, dispel some myths, answer some questions, generate some questions, give you some things to think about, and hopefully at the end, put you in a better position to understand how to better advocate for your child and for other children in your district, and what the district is required to do, what they're not required to do necessarily. And I think one of the distinctions tonight would be to talk about compliance versus quality, because I think they're two different things, and it's important to recognize as we go through. So with that in mind, just a reminder, I'm an attorney, but this is not legal advice. I can't give you that because we don't have an attorney-client relationship. If you want to use these materials in another session with other parent groups and talk, you're certainly free to use that, as long as you give attribution to us for having done this and don't charge them for the use of the material. Here's what we're going to talk about within the history of gifted and talented education tonight and getting into the law. So you can see those items listed there. We're going to touch on all of them in our next half hour. So we're going to walk through this pretty quickly. I want to start by mentioning recent changes in the Department of Ed. The gifted and talented section was transitioned from supplemental services to ed services in the Office of Standards. Now it makes sense because that's part of a thorough and efficient education. It's part of standards, and within Division of Teaching and Learning Services, Crystal Cinieri has now taken over Leslie Franks McRae. Elaine, Connie have been working, and Jen Matson have been working with Crystal as she begins her role as the state coordinator for gifted. And hopefully they will continue a lot of the good work that was done by Leslie Franks McRae and Sierra Beelan. The email that we got from them explained why the shift was that it wasn't that it was supplemental, rather the services must be provided to gifted and talented students in kindergarten through grade 12. It's part of a thorough and efficient education. It's not supplemental, it's not additional, it's part of that for everybody. And we'll be talking about that. I want to go back to information I read in the Gifted Commission on Programs for Gifted Students. There were findings and recommendations back in January 2005, so that's 18 years ago. And they had a great background in this to talk about New Jersey gifted. Actually, we've started to look at gifted education as far back as 1866. That's hard to believe, but that was the first efforts in New Jersey to promote the education of gifted students. In August of '73, there was a report on the education of the gifted and talented submitted to the commissioner and state board. There were two statewide conferences in '74 and '75, along with a series of conventions. The Public School Education Act, the T&E law, Chapter 212, back in 1975, specified that an element of thorough and efficient should include a breadth of program offerings to develop the individual talents and abilities of pupils. So giftedness was in there, at least implicitly, way back in 1975. In '77, DOE received a special state appropriation for G&T. There was an Office of Gifted and Talented created in the Department of Ed in 1977 to assist local districts in their gifted programs. In '77, there was a central office program coordinator in each of the 3 regional education improvement centers that would work with districts in terms of improving their gifted and talented educational programs. And then was the development of the Commissioner's Advisory Council on Gifted and Talented Education. It's similar to the SCTIAC committee that we're going to hear about later on. There were guidelines for gifted programs released in 1978, and you can see the listings there in terms of the definition and recommendations. Now, guidelines are important to understand. When the state issues guidelines, they are recommendations. They are not the law. They are not a statute. They are not code. One of the issues that the state tends to back away from generally is in the curricular area. They don't mandate certain curriculums. They will give you curriculum guidelines and structures and things, but the local districts will make those determinations. So guidelines in '78. In '79, the governor signed a Gifted Child Development Act that required public schools to identify gifted students and provide an appropriate education. That's back in 1979. So that's what, 44 years ago, if my arithmetic is good. Commissioner required to conduct a study of existing programs and needs. The results were reported to the governor and legislature in April 1981, but they were never made public, and the study did conclude that DOE should do more. In '87, there was an advisory council on gifted ed that worked with DOE staff to develop gifted ed estate plan for New Jersey. So that was developed in '87. The purpose was to identify activities that would be initiated to assist local school districts to design ed programs to meet the needs of intellectually and academically gifted students. The plan outlined the need for multiple measures for identification. That sounds familiar. Differentiated programs for gifted students. That sounds familiar. Staff training and sound evaluation design. All back in 1987. So we're talking 46 years ago, right? Now, as sometimes happens, funding was not continued for the state and regional coordinator positions, and the Government Commission's Advisory Council on Gifted and Talented Ed was disbanded. In 93, an ad hoc committee on gifted ed was convened to develop a white paper on the status of gifted ed in New Jersey. There was a report that addressed many of the same issues as before. The DOE staff in 93 shrunk from a team of 4 to 1 that had responsibility also for visual and performing arts. When that person retired, G&T was shifted to another professional that had dual program responsibilities. In 99, the State Board of Ed identified gifted programs as part of its strategic plan. And then we get the first regulations that got adopted. Now, regulations are adopted by the State Board. They're not a statute that's done by the legislature, but these are all requirements for districts to follow. And the first round of G&T regs came about in April of 2000. So what did the State Board come up with? Well, they said, we're going to define what a G&T student is. We're going to require K-12 identification, programs and services, and called for more information on status of gifted ed in New Jersey. The definition of gifted and talented students there is not really much different than what we see right now. The exceptionally able language, which I've italicized there, is no longer in the current definition, but the key is students who possess or demonstrate high levels of ability in one or more content areas when compared to their chronological peers in the local district. It is a local norm. So when we talk to people, I've over the years have talked to administrators. I'm thinking of one in a particular urban district that said to me, oh, we don't have any gifted students here. Well, that's not possible because you're comparing to the chronological peers in that district. Or I've talked to administrators in maybe a higher socioeconomic district, I'm thinking of a couple of them, and they've said, well, all of our kids are gifted. Well, no, that's not true either. They may all be good, but only those who possess high levels of ability compared to the chronological peers are the gifted students in your district. Now, the standards might look different district to district, but every district should have a core of identified gifted and talented students. I've heard from people at NJAGC, how to get National Association of Gifted Children, talk about 6 to 8% of the student population, kind of a round number as to what that identification should look like. And they should have instructional adaptations. And that's the second definition that has carried its way through. And those are whatever adjustments or modifications are necessary for a number of students, including gifted, in order to benefit from what's then the core curriculum content standards. Instructional adaptations are key phrase because that's something that every district should be doing. And it's a great question to ask. All right, you've identified my child as gifted. What are the instructional adaptations that are using for him or her in this circumstance? So kind of keep that in the back of your head. We then have the actual code, and you can see it there. And I'm not going to read through it all, but you can see it's ensuring that curriculum instruction designed and delivered in such a way that students benefit from it, including those who are gifted. In section 5, what are we looking at for gifted and talented students? You have to identify them, provide appropriate instructional adaptations. This is 2000. This is 23 years ago. Provisions for ongoing identification, K-12. In this time, they said reviewed annually. That didn't carry over into the most recent definitions, but it's kindergarten to grade 12, and develop. And then this is important. Appropriate curricular instructional modifications for gifted students, including content, process, products, and learning environment. What those are, look, I'm an attorney. I am not a teacher of gifted. I leave the discussion of what those should look like to people like Connie and Elaine and other folks within our organization who are expert in that. I can tell you this is what's supposed to happen, though. So this was 2000. In 2001, they sent out a survey to every public school district building in the state, which is over 2,000 buildings. There's actually about 2,500 school buildings in the state of New Jersey right now. 1,350 surveys were returned, and it addressed a variety of information. Now, these were shared with the Commissioner and State Board, used by DOE staff, but was never formally released to school districts, which would have been a good thing. 2002, they shifted responsibility from the Office of Academic and Professional Standards, which is kind of where it is now, to 3 regional offices. One person in each region was responsible for assistance and training. And there was a creation of the New Jersey Commission on Programs for Gifted Students that began in 2003. It was another advisory committee. And here's what they came up with. They studied the identification process, programming, funding, policies, etc. They came up with recommendations. The report was issued in 2005. Roberta Braverman of NJAGC was a very active person on that program. There were 31 recommendations, 14 sub-recommendations, and when you read through them, they ring as true today as they did back then. So then, in July 2005, the State Board adopted new regulations, and they looked similar in some ways. They deleted exceptionally able from the definition of gifted and talented student. They kept basically the same instructional adaptation definition, so that's still there. They made a couple of changes in the sections on gifted and talented in 5, making provisions for ongoing K-12 identification for G&T students that includes multiple measures. So that was in there. So it can't just be one test or one recommendation. You need to have multiple measures. How many you have is up to the local district, as long as you have multiples. The board will provide appropriate K-12 education services for G&T students. That was new at that time. Develop appropriate curricular instructional modifications. That didn't change. And, which was new in 2005 and is still in there today, that should take into consideration the pre-K to grade 12 gifted program standards of the National Association for Gifted Children in developing their programs. So the district must consider those standards. The commission that made recommendations recommended to the state board that every district be required to adopt those standards. That was not followed through by the state board. They just said you need to consider them. So considering them varies from district to district, probably based on the technical expertise of the individuals looking at that curriculum, but they need to be considered and need when the program is developed. The strengthening gifted and talented, and by the way, from 2005 until now, not a lot of change in the administrative code. So now we get the new law, which is a lot like the old law, except in certain areas. We still have our definitions of gifted and talented student instructional adaptations. We're still ensuring identification, equal access is new. Services, adaptations, and curricular modifications K-12. So if your district's starting in grade 3, they're not in compliance. That's a word we hear a lot. If they only do grades 3 to 8, they're not in compliance. You have to consider the NJAGC gifted programming standards, also their white papers and position statements, and important, and this was part of the code, and I didn't mention this before, that the law says you should support professional development for teachers of gifted. Another great question to ask. The law requires that you support professional development for your teachers of gifted. Mr. Superintendent, Ms. Superintendent, Ms. Board President, can you tell me what professional development you are providing for your teachers of gifted? Because the law requires that you support that professional development. Are you sending them the programmings? Are they getting training? Because it's teachers of gifted are across the board. Your regular classroom teacher has gifted students in that classroom. They should be receiving professional development of some sort. Your teacher of gifted that's identified as such, your coordinator of gifted, they should all be getting professional development. And the district is supposed to be supporting that. I always say when people come to a program that with whether it's with Legal One or NJAGC, and they've paid to go there, I say, I see your district is supporting you because they'd have to do that under the law. The definition remains the same. It's both in the statute in 18A 3515 and the administrative code in 6A8. It's a local norm compared to the chronological peers in the district. And they require modifications to achieve in accordance with their capabilities. So we talked about the local norm issue. It also created a coordinator of gifted and talented services in DOE. This is part of the new law. We know Crystal Cinieri is now in that position. The coordinator is responsible for a lot of things, including support by identifying and sharing research and resources to school districts as they develop their programming, responsible for reviewing information about G&T services, and doing what needs to be done to implement the act. I think this piece coming up right now is one of the most important pieces of the new law. And I say that because it has created interest, it has created concern, it has created knowledge that the Department of Ed is going to get information from the local district. Much of what we talked about in the law was already in the administrative code, but here's one piece that was not. The district has to file a report with the coordinator every 3 years. Now, it's based on the QSAC cycle, the Quality Single Accountability Continuum Monitoring Cycle. So if it's a year they're undergoing monitoring in their district, they have to file this report. And what do they have to file? What services, policies, and procedures they're doing, the number of students receiving G&T services at each grade level, disaggregated by race, gender, special ed, and English language learners. A big area of developing in the state in terms of all academic areas, but especially G&T are your English language learners. That's a big issue right now. But you need to send in that information. The professional development opportunities in G&T, the number of employed staff identifying and providing services to G&T students. So what your program is in your district. Got to send that into the commissioner's office. Every 3 years, you also have to have the complaint process. What is your complaint process? And have it set forth in your policy and how it goes from chain of command up through the superintendent to the Board of Education and can go to the commissioner in a challenge. And your website information has to post policies and procedures. So all of this is part of the new law. More transparency, that's important because it's out there. And districts now actually have to do something and send something into Trenton. So now all of a sudden there's interest. Because now we actually have to say that we're doing things, and we have to send that into the commissioner, and we need to make sure that we're covering that. So a lot more interest in local districts. Biggest thing I think in this law is to have that piece in there. The reporting goes. Elaine has mentioned to me that in terms of the reports that came in, the first set of reports in October 2020 were not that good. And because of that, they sent out again. And each year they've sent out a broadcast email for the cohorts that have to report. And the most recent one was the ones that were due in October 2022. So that information is at the Department of Education. I would say to you, it is a public document because it is a document submitted by the district to the Department of Ed. And it should be obtainable through, I was going to say QSAC, but OPRA, through the Open Public Records Act, or you should be able to get that information. I know people have struggled to get that, but it should be available. There's also a committee that was formed, and this is another good piece. We saw all those other advisory committees. Well, there's one here now, and that started in April of 2020. The purpose of the committee is to, as you see, assist the department in developing and disseminating resources that guide local efforts to implement fair and balanced selection processes for the identification of gifted students, understanding the intersection between social and emotional learning and the needs of gifted students. I was never a big social emotional learning person, and what changed my mind was the pandemic. And I saw what was then our 5-year-old grandson on the computer all day, evidencing the behaviors that my teacher of gifted colleagues have talked about, what gifted kids demonstrate. And I'm watching him doing different things online, and he was the go-to kid. You know, that was the one the teacher went to for an answer. And he'd be seemingly not paying attention and tearing up little pieces of paper and doing different things. But he was always right on top of stuff. I'm saying he's probably gifted from what they're saying, what they've talked about. And it turned out he was. So I saw his stress. I saw him cry at the end of some days from what he was dealing with in terms of the classroom stuff. So I became a much more of a proponent of identifying social emotional learning stuff. Awareness about programmatic options for gifted and twice exceptional, identifying equity issues. That's a big item right now. And it's something that we probably should be pushing the button a little harder on in other districts. Integrate professional development certification and provide input to the department. You can see the names of some of the people. You see Elaine's name here, Mary Rufo, Lynn Henwood, Karen Machuca. I think Karen may be on tonight. I don't know. But the SCTIAC members that we're aware of, Jenny Lamont, Cindy Assini, Leslie Puente Irvin, along with the others there, they are all part of this committee that is continuing with the shift over. So they do some very, very good work at the state level and will translate that into local level work. Funding. People say, oh, we don't get any money for gifted. Well, that's not actually true. It's part of a constitutionally guaranteed education. I'm not going to give you a school funding course right now, but understand that the third and efficient clause of the Constitution, that it's a free and appropriate public education for kids 5 to 18. The School Funding Reform Act is our current version of the law, and there are a series of reports, the most recent, the Educational Adequacy Report for 2023. Very simple the way districts get funding. There's an adequacy budget. It's an artificial construct for state aid. They basically take these dollar amounts per pupil that you see here. That are that's what the state says you should be spending on education for students. Multiply that at each grade level by the number of students. Add in some ad risk, some special education, some bilingual and transportation numbers. Crank that all up, you get a dollar amount. There's a local share, half property values, half state income tax incomes. Take those two numbers, take the difference of it. That's the equalization aid that a district gets. There's $7.8 billion in equalization aid spread across the whole state. Depends where you are. If you're in a district that's a high socioeconomic district, you probably don't get a lot of equalization aid. If you're in a district that's a low socioeconomic district, you may get a lot of equalization aid. As an example, the Newark Board of Education, their budget is a little bit over $1 billion per year. A little over $1 billion per year. About 890 million of that comes from equalization aid. So the state is providing a lot of money into that district because of the economic conditions there. Okay. If you're looking at, I live in Woodbridge, we get about 7-8% of our budget is based on equalization aid. All the rest is local tax levy. So it depends on where you sit in terms of dollar amounts that are there. But here's the kicker. If you look at this screen, this comes from the latest report, and this is the model school district that they create for generating state aid. Now, if you look at the top, there's an asterisk that says base costs include resources for the gifted and talented. There's one in elementary, middle school, high school. So it's in there. It's like Prego spaghetti sauce. It's in there, okay? If you look at the other teachers in the personnel line at elementary, there's 5.2 listed there. I've been told by people at the department that either 2 or 3 of those are teachers of gifted. If you go down a little further to the additional cost sections, there's G&T supplies and materials. So here's the good news. Gifted is part of a thorough and efficient education. It's the same as your math program, your English program, your language program, everything that the district does and supports with its funding. Gifted is part of that. It's a constitutionally guaranteed education. It's part of that. It's just now we fight with against every other resource. So they can usually find money for the football team, but do they find money for the gifted program? Actually, gifted's an academic program. They should find that before football. That's extracurricular. So it's a local decision as to how they work that out. So I think it's important to understand that too. Responsibility, we've talked about already under 18A 3536 and 6A8, K-12, multiple measures, appropriate services with instructional adaptations. The curricular instructional modifications get developed, including content, process, products, and learning environment. Sounds familiar. It's been there for many, many years. It's part of the local district policies and curriculum guide. Here's the kicker that gets frustrating. There is no state-specific content or curriculum standard for gifted ed. It is a local school district policy and part of the local curriculum. Now, before you throw up your hands, it's no different than your math program. It's no different than the language program. It's no different than science. Those are all locally developed based on academic standards. So it's all part of that same mix. It's just, who can lobby better for those dollars. Consideration of the standards we talked about, actively assisting and supporting professional development, that's still there. Again, that quote is out of some commissioner case law where people have challenged gifted programming. It's gone all the way to the Commissioner of Ed. And in the case determination, they've repeatedly said there's no New Jersey law regulation that prescribes the substantive content. So it's all local norm, local development. From an educator's perspective, this gives them a certain comfort level. From a parent's perspective, this can be very frustrating because if somebody challenges the program and goes to the commissioner, if the district's policies and procedures are clear, if they're consistent with the DOE policy identification, if their selection process is set forth, if there's a rational basis for what they're doing and it's correctly, consistently applied, generally the district wins. Again, because if they have something, they generally win a challenge like that, which then turns your head to say, okay, what do I do? Means your fight becomes more local in working with the teachers and working with administration to try and improve that. I mean, we have not seen a case go to the commissioner since the new legislation. However, I'm not encouraged that it would be any different in terms of the answer. Equity, bilingual, comp ed. Districts are required to reduce or prevent the underrepresentation of minority male and female students in all classes, including gifted. Universal assessments, including K-3, tends to be a good way to go. The comprehensive equity plan is something districts are going through right now. And I'm going to zip through some of these pretty quickly so we can get some questions. And that needs to be developed. If you have Kristen Baker of NJAGC was at a program I did. She said, I didn't know we had this equity plan. She went into her district and she talked to the business administrator and they included assistance for gifted ed in terms of their comprehensive equity plan. They added a gifted ed component, which was pretty good. Bilingual programs for English language learners should also be addressing gifted and talented services. There was a bilingual piece of education where the commissioner developed guidance for English language learners. That guidance was set forth. You can see the Department of Ed guidance on the bottom. Accountability. So how do people get held accountable? QSAC, Quality Single Accountability Continuum. This is the old instructional and program piece for QSAC pre-2018. There were only 2 QSAC points involved where gifted was mentioned. The current piece in every instructional and program district performance review indicator has to contain a reference to modifications for gifted students. That's all the academic areas: English and language arts, math, science, social studies, world languages, health and phys ed, visual and performing. 4 points in each section, 28 QSAC points out of 100 in total. And you can see the italicized piece there. The district must demonstrate that they are doing integrated accommodations and modifications for students who are gifted. Are they lying on the form, or are they truly providing those modifications? That's the question to ask. So, you're doing through QSAC this year. I know you've signed off on the fact that you're providing modifications for gifted students. Can you tell me what you're doing for my child who's been identified as gifted? Because we know you have to do that because you signed off and said you were doing it. So just what are we doing? There is also a new piece in the operations section of QSAC where they need to submit their report. They need to have the complaint policy on the homepage. They need to have detailed information regarding policies and procedures used to identify and the continuum of services offered. That's something the Department of Ed gets, and they will be making that part of QSAC. The district has to be compliant with the requirements to get their 3 points in the operations section. So 24 points in instruction and programs, 3 points here in operations. And I've listed here, this is not new. There have been monitoring pieces going back to 1984 in talking about giftedness and what districts are supposed to be doing. Teacher of gifted certification, any teacher with any certification right now can teach gifted. Those districts that have the best programs have done good professional development for their teachers of gifted. The ones listed here have some terrific programming. Rutgers, Montclair State, Rider. UConn has an online graduate degree. I believe Rider has one also. Orange and Patterson gifted programs. Their teachers were all sent through the Rutgers Gifted Certificate Program. It's I think like a 15-hour course, and it really is a solid course for teachers of gifted. I would recommend it heartily for districts to look at, and recommendations for you as parents to make, in terms of professional development. Have you sent your teachers to these programs? This would help a lot if the teachers knew what they had to do and understood this better. So in an end, here's all our issues. We talked about a lot of stuff tonight and lots of challenges to meet. So now I turn it over to you. Questions from anybody. And Elaine, do we have anything in the chat or anything that you'd like me to talk about there?
I don't see anything yet. Aiden's actually going to take over the Q&A section. So go ahead, A.
Yeah, so first of all, Michael, thank you so much for presenting such vital information towards us. At this point, we would like to offer all of our participants to submit questions. You can do so by typing in the chat, and one by one, I will read off the questions and have Michael as well as our panel answer these questions. Michael specifically. Sorry. All right. Okay, so we have one answer right now. We have one question, excuse me, I should say.
Okay.
I'd like to see my school's G&T report to the New Jersey DOE. Who should I send an OPRA to? The superintendent? Michael?
Superintendent would be a good person. If you know who your coordinator of gifted is, that would be the person to talk to also if you have one. But whoever would be in charge, I think the superintendent is typically the custodian of records in most districts. Also, sometimes it's a school business administrator. So I would start with the superintendent. And if you don't get a good response for that, it is a public document because they submitted it to the Department of Ed. Now, they submit it if they're in that QSAC cycle. So depending on where they are, because it's like the third of the districts each year. So if their district may have submitted it last year, they maybe have submitted it this year. Everybody submitted it in 2020, so you can at least get that one. But if they were in the QSAC cycle this year, then they would have had submitted for this year as well.
Okay, our next question is, and by the way, just as a mentioning for our audience, should you have a question and you would like to remain anonymous, you're more than welcome to do that. You should be able to do that through Zoom by selecting a button to not disclose your identity. The next question that we have is from Danielle, and she asks, my district doesn't start G&T until 3rd grade. However, they have a WIN program, what I need for ELA and math. It's a pullout once per week. Does this WIN program qualify for gifted and talented under grade 3?
It probably does in the eyes of the state. When the state looks at that, and obviously it's not the best thing that you would like to see happen. But I would have to ask this question too. Does the WIN program, is that something for every student, or is it for specifically identified students?
So that's a good question. And Danielle, maybe you can follow that up. We'll go to the next question first. And
Hey,
Danielle,
before we leave that though, Aiden, let me say this.
Sure.
If everybody can do it, then it's not a gifted program.
So Danielle responds top 5% in class.
Okay, and hopefully there is another measure that they're using other than just the top 5% of class, because you do need to have multiple measures. So hopefully there's more than that. If there isn't, then they're not in compliance. People like that word. But it sounds like they would probably be deemed, be deemed acceptable by the department because they have something. I mean, put aside whether procedurally they're identifying properly, but if they do have something at that grade level for the top 5%, that probably would meet the department standard, which is not a very high bar, by the way.
We have another question, and thank you for that. Shana or Shauna, my apologies, asks, is there anything in the new law that requires schools to provide gifted instruction during the school day, as opposed to after school, before school, or during recess?
Okay, not in the new law per se, but that has always been the case. And I think if you look at the Department of Ed webpage, they have a Q&A on there that talks about gifted programming. And since it is part of a thorough and efficient education, it needs to be provided during the regular school day and is not something added on as a supplemental program after school, during recess or some other time. It should be included in the regular school day.
We have another question from John. John asks, if my children attend a private school outside my local district, are we able to access services in any way?
That's a great question. Generally, no, because you've opted to go to private school. So if we're not talking about special education services, that sometimes there's, chapter 192, 193 monies where certain services are available through private schools. But from gifted, there isn't anything in there that would automatically entitle you to that through a private school. Having said that, depending on the district, depending on the circumstances, it's kind of like homeschooling. There are some districts that will permit homeschoolers to be involved in gifted programming or some other kind of programming, even though they're not technically enrolled in the district. It's a question to ask. I think your answer is probably going to be no, but you may get a district that they may surprise you. But there's no entitlement to that from a private school setting.
We have another question from Sue. Sue asks, what are the typical measures? MAP, COGAT, NJSLA, iReady?
You're now getting into an area that's not my expertise. I would have to defer to Elaine and Connie and the other more substantive educational experts in gifted ed, and maybe they can answer that.
Or so, Elaine, is there something that you'd like to add to that question?
And I'd be happy to talk about this a little bit more later on. I don't want to take up a lot of people's time tonight. However, I'm looking for the question. What I do want to say is multiple measures are required by the law. Multiple measures include a mix of objective and subjective criteria. So you should have an achievement measure, an ability measure. I always recommend a creativity test. My concern with NJSLA is that it's only a grade level assessment. And when you're looking to identify kids for gifted services, you want to have tests with high ceilings where the kids can actually show what they know, which is often beyond grade level. I'm not a fan of iReady. COGAT is, out of the ones that you've listed here, COGAT is the best. But when using COGAT, it's important that you use the subtests and not just the composite score. So Sue, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. You can always email me for more information.
Okay.
Aiden, let's take one
Yes.
more because we're getting to time. I think we need to make sure we have enough time for Karen and Myra and Juan.
Sure, absolutely. We'll go with one more question. And this is from a question from Raj. Raj asks, what was the wording of the prior law when challenges in court didn't work? How does the new law strengthen things? Shouldn't it be more likely for parents to win in court if the school isn't actually offering G&T or pretending to?
Well, I think with the new law, what the new law does is it makes things a little more transparent, much more transparent than what it was. And it also requires the districts to submit data to the department. The $64,000 question, or actually probably the $1 million question, let me update that, is going to be, what's the Department of Education's response going to be when parents file a complaint? It goes to the commissioner and questions the quality of the gifted program. And I don't think we know the answer to that in terms of whether they're going to view things differently than what they did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I'm sad to say that as long as there was something, it could be a 1 day a week, 1 hour pullout program, that would probably suffice in the eyes of the department that the district was doing something. Having said that, then the challenge is to lobby at the local level to make that program the best program it can be.
Well, we appreciate all of the answers that you provided, Michael. And I believe that at this point, we'll close the Q&A so that we can move forward towards the parent.
Before we move on to the parents, just to reiterate, I've put an email address in
Program.
chat. If
Okay,
you,
so
sorry, I'm not sure if you're able to hear me, but my email address and name are in chat. If you have questions about identification specifically, email, but email any of us with questions that you didn't get answered tonight. All right, parents, are we ready? Karen, have we decided that you're going first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karen, and I suppose I'm just here to share my story. It's an ongoing story. We haven't reached the end of it. But I just wanted to explain sort of what my experience has been so far and what I have been trying to do in my own district. So for me, it all started last fall. I had a twice exceptional child. I had a private report, so I brought it to my district expecting, a discussion around what the services were. And, I was told, I remember at my initial meeting that very clearly that we don't formally identify children because we don't like to label them. And that for me had very much been a red flag, because my understanding, having read the background of the law, is that we have to identify them because districts are required to report it to the Department of Ed. So that was really what started me, because I was like, I have an older child with an IEP, and in my mind, classification relates to services. So I sort of felt it was very similar, that to be identified gives you access to these services. So from there, I started researching our board policy, and I went into our policy and I saw that the policy hadn't been updated since the new Strengthening Gifted and Talented Act had been enacted. So therefore, it wasn't reflective of all of the new wording. And as well, we didn't have a complaint procedure related to G&T in our district website. So for me, they were sort of a number of red flags. Just when, again, we talk about compliance and what a district should be doing. I'm a parent. I don't have a background in education. I don't understand about the educational side and programming. But for me, it was that basic level of sort of, this is what we should be doing. We don't seem to be doing it. So at that point, I started escalating it through the chain of command. I spoke to the building principal. I spoke to our director of program and curriculum. I spoke to our assistant superintendent, etc. I went through all the chain, and everyone was very polite. I brought the printout. I was trying to be heard, but unfortunately at the time, I just didn't feel like my concerns were being heard. So anyone knows me, I like to do my research, and when I feel I'm right, I don't give up. So going back to what Mike suggested, I decided to Oprah request the Department of Ed directly regarding my district's submission, the report that they were required to do in the fall of 2020. And then I also Oprah requested, as part of New Jersey SMART, districts are required to report the number of children identified as for gifted and talented through each grade, broken out by whether they have a special education classification, English language learners, etc. And the information that came back from that was, unfortunately, my district hadn't any children identified at the elementary age. So I took all that information, the report, going back to the importance of professional development. It mentioned classroom differentiation. It mentioned dialogue about identifying. But again, and I'm sure Elaine and Connie and many others will speak, that's not enough. So I took all that information. I did my research online. I took samples of how you word complaints. And again, I don't know, I feel sometimes a lot of us feel we don't know what we're doing, but I sent it to my Board of Ed. And from that, then there has been progress. And I think, progress is slow. And I think it's important as parents here when we're advocating, we'd love to see immediate change, but that's not the reality. So since then, my board has updated. They recently had their first reading of the updated policy that is more compliant with the wording of the Strengthening Gifting Act. We have had 2 staff members sent to the recent conference, the NJAGC conference, which was good. I would have liked to see more staff, but it's a start. And I have been told that G&T is under review for the fall, and I watch that quite closely and regular checking in. So for me, and just sharing some of the things that have worked for me, I always try to approach it very much from an equity point of view. This isn't just about my child, it's for all children. It's for the gifted and talented. I have a child who's twice exceptional, so I want to make sure the measures that we're using to identify are equitable. My 2 older children were born overseas. We're fortunate to be native English speakers. but I always think of other people who have the same experience, who mightn't speak, native English, all the potential barriers to children being identified. And I try to very much get that across, that I'm interested in this for not only my own child, but for all the children in our district. I've empowered myself by attending the webinars through the NJAGC, which has been wonderful. And also just then more on a local level, I find being vocal in my community and understanding the process is really important. So starting off by attending board meetings, I have started to voice and speak at public comment at board meetings, which can be daunting. And I was nervous at first, particularly because I was speaking about gifted education. But in fact, people have come up to me, and sometimes when I talk, people hear my accent, because oftentimes I'm calling in on Zoom and they don't know what I look like. And the feedback in my community is really nice. So sometimes if people feel a bit nervous how their comments would be received, please know I have had great feedback so far. And also just ongoing, like it's following up on the board meetings, it's watching the agenda. So for example, we've recently had the first reading and it was up there and they had the updated complaint procedure, but it didn't have a timeline on when a parent would receive a response. So I called in and made the comment that it's really necessary for parents to know the timeline when they'll receive a response. And to the credit of my board, they did hear that, and there was a timeline added to it when it came back around. And again, just following it is understanding the process. I'm always watching the professional development that's on the agenda. The board have to approve everything that happens. At a recent budget meeting, I called in. I asked about what the curriculum and programming will be in the fall. I asked how it was going to be funded. I asked who was going to teach it, because again, these are services, but it has to be funded, as Mike called out. But I think, again, just asking these questions can keep the topic on the agenda. And as well, this parent group that we have been meeting regularly has been a wonderful resource for me as a parent. Connie and Elaine have been facilitating it. It's just meeting like-minded parents who are encountering the same struggles. We share our successes, sometimes our frustrations, but if anyone is interested in joining us, please feel free to do so. I think Elaine or someone is going to put the emails in the chat. So please reach out if you'd like to join us. They're held weekly, typically around 6:30 on a Tuesday. And again, it's just been really beneficial to connect with other parents. That's my story. We joke, I'm not there yet, but I am motivated to continue to advocate for my own kids and others in the district, and hopefully just share experiences with other parents.
Thank you, Karen. I just wanted to follow up. You had created some templates that other parents can use. Can you just talk about that real briefly, please?
Sure. Again, my Oprah request, just the wording I used in that for the information I got from it. Again, the sample of my complaint. I'll be honest, I went and used samples of special education compliance complaint and used them as a template for this complaint. I took out all my personal information, but I've shared them. I'm sure if other people who come in and add to it and perfect it, I would welcome that. But it can be daunting to do these things. So the more we share our experiences and resources, I feel it just makes it easier and less daunting for other parents. Because I think there's so much being done at the state level, obviously, but I think the big thing now is for us as parents at a local level as well, equally, to be holding our districts accountable for what they should be doing.
Nice job, Karen. Thank you. Myra and Juan, are you ready?
We are.
Yes.
Thank you, Elaine.
Welcome.
So kind of what Karen's saying, we were going back and forth a little bit, who's going to go first, ourselves or Karen, and we were saying maybe the person with the best ending should go first, right? And the reality of the situation is that we are both going through this, right? There's really no ending at this point. It's both going through the trials and tribulations, and it's okay, right? We're going to support each other, and this is why we have these type of calls. So I'll start by saying that we're not the type of people that say, "Oh, our son is super high ability and super talented." And one of the things we started noticing about him, though, is that he's the type of kid that loves to read. likes to draw, play guitar, and play soccer. And these are activities that we really don't have to push him a lot to do for him to enjoy. So, when he was starting doing these type of activities pretty well, we sort of had an idea that he was a higher ability. And this happened last fall, right? That we started noticing a little bit more of this. Fast forward to earlier this year in the winter timeframe, we had our scheduled meeting with our teacher, his teacher rather. And so, kind of the feedback was he's doing well. And, we asked about his MAP scores because, these are things that are administered 3 times a year in our district. And she didn't have it available. Luckily enough, we talked to the principal later that day. We had a scheduled meeting just to see what other activities are available in the district. And sure enough, she told us our son's MAP scores, and she said they're very well, right? Extremely well, actually. So at that point, we kind of put two and two together and said, so what is our district doing from a gifted and talented program, right? And honestly, we didn't know where to start. So then we looked at the policy and regulations in our district, and we did some Googling, and we found out that there was an act that was passed in early 2020. And we said, how do we find out more information about this? Again, Google is a great resource. So we found out about NJAGC, and we were lucky enough to be the last couple of registrants in the conference, the annual conference that they have. So a lot of wealth of information. We attended Mike's seminar, and we got ourselves educated. And so we came back with a lot of motivation and knowledge that there were people in the same boat as us. Fast forward, what we did was we kind of did a semi-grassroots effort. We had about 7 parents email the superintendent saying that we believe our district is not compliant with the act that passed in 2020. As a result, they actually put up a website stating that they do have a G&T program, and they listed the multiple measures. We could argue whether we agree completely or not with what they've listed there, but there was something there at this point. So this was like a mini win for us. We met at that point with our district about our son specifically, and we said, this is what we have. And they offered us something called an IRNS to kind of, I think, to kind of placate us a little bit to address our son's ability and meet our son's ability. So what we did was to help strengthen our cause. Again, this is our scenario. We had our child evaluated by a psychologist with a standardized test. And in fact, according to the test, he was classified as gifted. We used that as backing or to help our case. And we were presented with really a 1-page IRS, and we weren't satisfied. So we hired a consultant, and it pretty much rewrote the whole thing with their help. And they ultimately adopted our modified IRNS plan. So in a nutshell, we're still fighting for the district to meet our son's ability. We're still fighting for an official gifted and talented program to be implemented. And so one thing that comforts me, and I know probably comforts Karen as well, is we have the backing of organizations like this to help us on our journey. So not sure if there's anything you wanted to kind of fill in there.
I think that, our oldest is our first child, right? And I think a lot of us struggle with really sort of deciding that our kid has certain abilities, right? And I think everybody struggles with that word gifted, and districts definitely struggle with it. And I think it was really, really important to attend that conference and to dive into that definition and to read the white papers as they are cited in the law, reading the law. I mean, I know that people get scared to read the law. It's 2 pages. It's really not that complicated. I think that made a huge difference for me in sort of not being afraid and not having, the myths and the misconceptions that go with saying that your kid is gifted and what that really entails. And even understanding it, that it just means that they're different and that they need to have their education modified so that they can benefit from that education. like my husband said, you know, it's a journey that we're still on. Our district early on was receptive to some, but maybe not to everything. And right now we're in a position where they seem to be trying to tailor a program to us, but we don't think that, you know, obviously that doesn't, I don't think that meets the law, because I don't think that they're doing that for all of the kids. I don't think they're really going out to apply these local norms and identify these kids and create appropriate programming for them. So, you know, that's where we're at. We are moving forward, figuring out how to keep pushing forward, not only for our son, but for anybody else who may need these services.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan, Myra, and Karen. I think that, and I've said this to the parents before, the people who really make change in a district are the parents. And that quote about never underestimate the power of a small group. Parents are the people who are going to get things done. So it's absolutely essential that you guys are fighting this fight. And I know it's frustrating, but you're making some progress. So keep it up. Attendees, I am going to again put email addresses into chat, and if you would like to have the templates that Karen has created, I can send those to you, but only if you want them. I don't want to push out information that you may not necessarily need. Mike, do you have any last words that you'd like to add? You're muted, my friend.
I see a question from Raj in the chat, and his question was about the prior wording in the prior law when challenges in courts didn't work, and shouldn't it be more likely for parents to win at this stage of the game? What I would say is the substantive nature of the law and the requirements for local districts really didn't change that much. What really changed in the new law was the transparency, the placing things on the website, the reports to the Department of Ed. So what the department and the commissioner would now do if there's a challenge to a local district's program, I think that's the question that we don't know the answer to, but we're looking forward to what that answer is going to be. And whether it be through the SCTIAC committee and their work in working with the department, whether they're going to look at this differently, we'll see where that goes. But the strengthening aspect, I think, came through transparency and a requirement of accountability and reporting. I think that's really the two pieces that where the most strengthening took place. At the end, the last comment from me is, I thought my journey was going to be over, but my journey has started again with a grandchild. So even we're in the next generation of journey. And we're having the same kinds of discussions in terms of that local district and what they're doing or not doing, as the case may be. And so it is frustrating, but you continue on and fight the good fight and hope it gets better.
Yeah, we just need to remember that we're trying to get services that these kids need, not to label them, not for any sort of elite program, but services that they need and they deserve, right? Mike, thank you so much for all the valuable information. Karen, thank you. Juan and Myra, thank you. I want to remind everybody that in 2 weeks, we have a follow-up webinar on the testing and assessment portion of gifted services with Dr. Matt Zakreski. So hopefully we will see you all there. Aiden, thank you. Connie, thank you. Any last words, Connie?
We are here. Contact us. We want to help.
Absolutely. So before I log off, I'm putting again a couple of email addresses into chat. Please make sure to reach out. Parents, if you want to share your email addresses, you're welcome to put them into chat as well. Don't want to do that for you. Anyway, thank you, everybody. And attendees, thank you for joining. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night, folks.
Thank you.